Okay folks, we are in the final section of this course. In the first lesson of this section, let's cover Arnold Parameters Tag. So let's right click on this abstract 3D object and from C4D to A tags add an Arnold Parameters Tag. We have been using this tag throughout this course and you should be quite familiar with it, but there are still some options that we haven't touched yet. So if you go to the tag tab, you have show custom parameters. If you enable it, you are gonna get this Arnold node type list. As I mentioned earlier, Arnold parameters tag is dynamic. So based on the object you apply this tag to, you are gonna have different options in the Arnold parameters tag. And here you can see different types of parameters tag in case you wanted to define the object type manually here. Let's disable show custom parameters for now. Down here you have user options, which you can use it in different ways, including defining object ID. And let's move to the main tab and run the IPR. You have primary visibility. If you disable it, the object won't be visible for the camera rays, but still visible in other ray types like specular, transmission, and diffuse. You can see it right now on the sphere and through the glass. We have cast shadows. If disabled, the object won't cast any shadows. We have visible in diffuse reflection and diffuse transmission. If diffuse reflection is disabled, the object won't affect global illumination or indirect diffuse rays. It won't contribute to it. If diffuse transmission is disabled, the object won't be visible in the diffuse transmission and subsurface scattering. We have visible in specular reflection. If disabled, the object won't be seen on reflective surfaces. Visible in specular transmission. If disabled, the object won't be seen through transmissive or refractive surfaces. So as I disable it, it can't be seen through the glass anymore. We have double-sided, whether the surface is double-sided or not. You have invert normals if you want to invert the normals on the surface, which is currently disabled. But inverting normals couldn't be easier in Cinema 4D. Just go to the polygon mode, select all the faces using Control A and right click and choose reverse normals if you wanted to, right? Then we have these self shadows, and if disabled, the object won't cast shadows on itself but still cast it on other objects. We have receive shadows. If disabled, the object won't receive shadows from other objects in the scene. We have opaque, which determines whether the object is going to be opaque or not. You should be quite familiar with this option as we have used it a lot. We have matte. If enabled, turns the object into a holdout matte, and it only affects primary rays, so you can still see it in reflective surfaces or through refractive surfaces. But if I change my IPR display to alpha, you can see it's also black in the alpha channel. Let me change the display back to beauty. We have trace sets, which we discussed in the shading section of the course. We have SSS set name here. I have these two spheres that have a standard surface shader applied to them with some subsurface scattering qualities. And as you can see, they are interpenetrating each other, and you can simply differentiate them because of this dark boundary between them. If I want Arnold to consider these two spheres as belonging to the same SSS set and therefore blurring cross object boundaries, I need to make sure these two spheres have the same SSS set names. So let's right click on the first sphere and add an Arnold parameters tag. And for the SSS set name, let's type something like 1 or whatever you want. Now let's duplicate this tag on our second sphere. And now that they have the same SSS set name, they look to be one whole object and not two separate ones. Now let's get back to the Arnold parameters tag that we have it applied to the abstract object. We discussed subdivision and displacement tab in the lesson when we're discussing displacement mapping. Let's go to the export tab, and here you can define which vertex map to be exported and can be used later on in shading networks. Let me quickly select the object itself and go to the polygon mode. Go to the let me just select a bunch of these polys here, and from the select menu choose set vertex weight and set the value to something like 100 and press OK. Now we have a vertex map tag added to our object, and if I get back to the model mode and select the Arnold parameters tag, Now you have export vertex maps, and it is set to all, so all the vertex maps of these objects will be exported by default. You can change it to selected and add your desired tags here to the vertex map list, and those will be exported only. And if set to none, no vertex map will be exported for this object. Let me just set it to all again. And down here, you can use a reference state, pref or reference position or bind pose of the object for shading purposes. For example, to avoid swimming of procedural textures when the mesh is distorted. With pref coordinates, you can always reference the same point on an object even when the object deforms. By clicking on this record reference object button, it will store the current state, points and normals of the object, and the number of stored points and normals will be visible in the status line under the button. Let's move over to the motion blur tab. The first option is enabled, and if you uncheck it, this object is not going to have any motion blur even if you have global motion blur turned on. You have use motion vector. If enabled, motion blur for this object will be calculated using a velocity vector, and down here you can define the vertex map to derive motion blur. If you check out Arnold support page, they have a great example on how to use motion vector practically, and I think covering this would be beyond the scope of this introductory course, but you can check out the tutorial section of the Arnold support for Cinema 4D and you can find that tutorial there. So there we go. That's about Arnold Parameters Tag, and I will see you in the next lesson.